Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hello listeners. Before I start this episode, I want to give a bit of an update and an explanation. If you're a keen listener of Nighttime, you probably realize this episode, covering the disappearance of then 3-year-old Dylan Ehler, was originally posted several months ago. Well, originally, this was planned to be a singular episode covering Dylan's story, all told by his father, Jason Ehler. But what I didn't expect was that Jason would share such sharp criticism of Dylan's grandmother's role in the disappearance. This told me that there's clearly two sides that need to be heard in this story. And as such, my coverage of Dylan's disappearance will be expanded into a multi-part series. An all-new Part 2 will be released in the coming days. But for those of you who want to revisit or simply miss Part 1, what will follow is a slightly revised version of that original episode that will end with a transition into the upcoming follow-up episode that'll be released shortly. Now let's get to it.
You are tuned to the Nighttime Podcast, focused on the fringe of Canada.
Hello listeners. There's something you'll probably notice if you scroll through the nearly 200 episodes of Nighttime. I've covered dark and horrific stories from all across Canada, crimes that have affected all colors, creeds, and all walks of life. But there is really just one thing that I shy away from. As a father of 2 young children, I simply crumble at the thought of harm coming to young children. This episode, perhaps more than any other I've done, was a mental workout to complete. Yet, it's a story that is very important. See, there's a little boy named Dylan that needs all the support he can get. To give some context to how this tragedy played out, in late April of 2020, just after COVID-19 began leading to widespread lockdowns, my province of Nova Scotia was home to the Nova Scotia shooting and arson rampage, Canada's worst act of mass murder. And then, just a short 3 weeks later, another unimaginable story would bring the province to its knees.
The description of 3-year-old Dylan Ehler is burned into the minds of Truro residents. For over 24 hours, dozens of people from police to neighbors joined in the extensive search for the rosy-cheeked, brown-haired toddler. Truro Police Chief Dave McNeil says it only took seconds for him to disappear from his grandmother's yard.
Dylan was at his grandmother's residence on Queen Street playing outside. His grandmother became briefly distracted and turned around for a moment, and when she turned back, Dylan was no longer in the yard.
Police arrived on scene within a few minutes after 911 was called. The search and rescue operation quickly evolved, and an extensive range of resources was called in, from the K9 unit to ground search and rescue and air surveillance by helicopter. And then, on Wednesday night,
we found a rubber boot belonging to Dylan. It was confirmed by the family that the boot did belong to Dylan. From there, we concentrated our efforts with the helicopter and more ground-intensive searching in that area. And the firefighters then found a boot further down the brook, nearing the mouth of the Salmon River where the two meet.
The waterway is near Dylan's grandmother's home. Police say the extensive search has not provided any new clues or information.
The news clip you just heard was among the first to share the desperate search for 3-year-old Dylan Ehler. Yet sadly, despite that clip airing just hours after he went missing, it's still fairly current almost a year later. After disappearing from his grandmother's backyard during a moment of her inattention, the only sign of Dylan that's been found were his 2 rubber boots, found caught amongst debris in the waterways that flow a short distance from his grandmother's property line. In Dylan's case, another cruel twist is that many of the updates that surround the nearly year-long search don't involve progress being made in locating him. It involves rumors, suspicions, online citizen detectives, ransom demands, and a cyberbullying case presently before the courts. And tonight, we're going to get into all of it. In this episode of Nighttime, we're going to be joined by Dylan's father, Jason Ehler. And our topic is the disappearance of his 3-year-old son, Dylan Ehler. So, Jason, so many people in Nova Scotia and around the world at this point know your family's story, but very few have heard directly from you. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you tonight. But maybe before we get into it, if you could just set it up and just tell me a bit about you, Jason. Like, who are you? What's your life like?
My life was just like anybody else's life. I'd wake up, I'd go to work, I'd come home, play with the kids. There was nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever.
So just a typical family. You've always been in Truro, your family?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I know you, of course, are Dylan's dad. Ashley's Dylan's mom. Tell me a bit about about your life and your relationship before Dylan joined you. Just maybe put some context on this. Like, what kind of family was Dylan born into?
Dylan was born into a pretty decent family. Loving, caring. Always doing things together. He has a sister, so an older sister. She's 13. Yeah. I like to say we were just a normal family, loving, caring. Always out doing something fun with the kids.
What would be a typical day at home? Like, I know your home life would have been probably similar. I have to mine. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, so it's always a bit of chaos in my house. Tell me a bit about what a typical day for the Ehlers would have been, before May of 2020. What's it like at the house?
Before, it was always just like yours. It was chaos. They were always running around. Dylan was the complete opposite of Lily. So Dylan was the hyper, not scared to do anything, keep you on your toes, with climbing and just about anything. Wasn't scared of nothing. Was willing to try anything, right? So.
Yeah, 3-year-olds. My 3-year-old's the same way. He's a daredevil, and that often leads to. I think he's had 2 emergency room visits at this point related to coffee table type mishaps. But and then having the older one. I don't know about you, but our challenge is always keeping the older one entertained, keeping the younger one entertained. It's just 2 very different worlds. So it's like herding.
You got one jealous with the other, or this one's getting more attention than the other. Yeah. There's a big difference, right? So Dylan gets all the attention where Lily's older, right? So there's conflicts, and kids are kids.
Yeah, I get it. So Dylan, what were his interests? So he was a bit of a nut around the house, as you described. But what? For a young boy, mine is very into, trucks and cars, that sort of thing. What was Dylan into?
He was big in trucks and cars. He was real big in dinosaurs, but he was most active out. He loved outside. He was an explorer.
Mm-hmm. Around kind of in the backyard and stuff at your place. Do you have kind of a den for him to go wild?
He wants to roughhouse and stuff like that. He was big on that, being thrown around, and I'll toss him on the couch and he'd run back to get tossed on the couch some more. Just very word for him, just nonstop.
Yeah,
a handful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, well, a lot of people who know Dylan know the tragedy that has the tragedy that has led to this mystery surrounding his disappearance and the now almost 1-year-long search for him. It all seems to start with Dylan being babysat by either your mom or his mom's mom. I'm just wondering, if you can kind of set the scene for what led to him being in her care that day. Were you working, or what was the story?
Well, we were on the no contact order because we had got into the domestic violence or the domestic dispute or whatever.
You and Dylan's mom, Ashley?
Yes, so we got into an argument, and then we had a no contact order for a few days. So I was at my mom's house, and Ashley and Dylan was here. And anyway, that morning, Ashley had dropped Dylan off at Dorothy's, at around 10:30. I was at my mother's, so I didn't even know.
And Dorothy is Ashley's mom?
Dorothy is Ashley's mom, yes, correct.
Okay.
So I didn't even know he was over there. So later on that day, I started messaging Dorothy around 2:15, wondering where Ashley was, and they're having fun, and where could I pick him up, stuff like that. Because during the domestic violence or the domestic dispute or whatever, I broke Ashley's phone. So I couldn't contact her, so I was messaging Dorothy that afternoon. And no response. I remember waking up that morning, and I was real eager to get him. I was excited. I just wanted to see him, more than ever. But anyway, I talked to my mother, and she agreed to having him over, so we went over to pick him up. And that's when I walked into it. So when I showed up, the cops were already there. I jumped out of the car, and I was like, I'm just here to get a phone number. If Ashley's here, I'm not here to, get in any trouble. I had no idea what was going on. And then the blonde-haired Truro police officer told me, well, your son's missing. And that's when it hit me hard. I walked right into it, had no idea.
And Dylan being at Ashley's mom Dorothy's house, was that an unusual thing, or was that a place he spent a lot of time at?
He spent some time there, yeah. Anytime she would take Lily, Dylan would be with her.
Okay.
So
you show up there, the police are there. I'm assuming you're told, away from the house what's going on. Your son is missing. At what point do you get the story as to what happened? Because I'm certain you must have been like, well, what the hell happened?
The story was she turned away for a brief second to tie a dog, and he was gone. And to try to wrap that around your head, that's too fast in my mind.
And you were, not you, Dorothy and Dylan were in Dorothy, his grandmother's backyard when this happened. She turned around to tie a dog, turns back, and he's just not there.
Just not there, yeah. So with that being said, the morning Ashley had dropped him off, she supplied a harness for Dylan, and was, Dorothy was given specific instructions to put on Dylan's harness if you bring the new puppy outside. That Dylan's a runner, so, keep an extra eye on him. And, if them things had been done, Dylan would still be here. So that's on its own.
Yeah, that's hard. The harness, people are probably like, a harness for your kid? With my oldest son, when he was little, I would take him to the mall, and it was this thing that was kind of like a backpack with a leash, and he could just run wild, and I'd just hold the leash. Is that what you mean by a harness?
Yeah, very similar, yes.
Okay.
Because Dylan was a runner, he it was more of a game to him. Any chance he got, he would run away from you. So Dorothy knew this stuff. Okay. So it was nothing new.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you mean by a runner as well. Like, people who don't have kids or haven't had a lot of experience with kids may not get that concept that my oldest always stuck right close to me. My youngest is the bit more the adventurous one, and he is the type that if I was, at the mall with him, let's say, or at Walmart, he would have no problem just, taking off and doing his own thing. That's what you mean by a runner?
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're in the backyard. She turns around, comes back to deal with the dog, turns her head back, let's say, or comes back, and Dylan's not there. The search for Dylan has largely centered around a river or lake or stream that flows near her yard. Can you kind of describe the geography of her backyard and how this lake or river plays into it?
So it's actually a brook, and the brook leads into Salmon River. So the boots were, the brook's probably only 200 meters, give or take, behind the grandmother's house.
And is there anything dividing it? Like if you're in her yard, is there like a fence between the yard and the brook, or is it just a field?
No, there's a fence. He would have had to run out onto the street, and the way Dylan was in the area he was, that we've learned from the stories that we've learned, that he would have had to go out onto Elizabeth Street, and he must have ran around the main street of Queen, wrapped around and headed up maybe the tracks or near the brook that way. It would have been the fastest way.
Wow. And do you know, like, is this a brook where like he would have went to, like, maybe she would have taken him down there to play or something? Like, would he know that this brook is there?
No. Apparently Dorothy told the cops and everybody that she didn't even know the brook was there, and she didn't know the river was there. Almost 12 years living there.
Because I looked at the area on like Google Maps and stuff just to get a sense of where this brook and the lake and Elizabeth Street and all this stuff was, and it doesn't look like at least looking at it on Google Maps, it looks like a pretty significant like stream of water. Like how if I'm sure you've been at the brook behind Dorothy's house where it's thought that Dylan ended up. How would you describe that? Is it the kind of thing you could, like, an adult could walk through, or is this a pretty powerful piece of water?
On a normal day, it's ankle deep in some spots. It's not a crazy rapid brook. I mean, flooding season, around the time Dylan went missing, there were spots that were, to your waist. But that would change frequently as you went down the brook, and the debris. The debris would blow your mind. They call it fences in the brook where things should have got caught. His first boot was actually found underwater in a shopping cart in the brook where it swirls. There's a spot where it kind of swirls around the bend and then comes back out. Mm-hmm. So all the water kind of pushes into this one corner. Over time made a hole. So the shopping cart was in the hole, and the first boot was in that. So. We had a retired RCMP officer. He came over and had a look, right? And one of the biggest questions were, why wasn't Dylan in that shopping cart? That's where the water. A lot of things don't make sense. There's full-size trees that were in that brook. It's a tough one.
That's been a big mystery as to how he hasn't turned up. And I guess, like, for people who are listening or watching us that don't know this story, it's been almost a year now that people have been looking for Dylan and largely focusing on this stream or this brook and where it leads. It seems like there's been countless like random civilians like from the community doing their searches as well as the official search. Maybe first let's talk, before we get too far into it, let's talk a bit about like the official search in the days just after he disappeared. Like, were you involved in, being down on the water as they searched? Like, how were they doing that? And what were they doing to search?
I snuck out at nighttime. It was, midnight, early morning when I got out because everybody was telling me you're in shock. You shouldn't be out there. So, I didn't see a whole lot of it, but they used so many different resources. They used, they had boats, they had underwater cameras, divers. They had one canine police dog. I can't remember the name of the Truro police dog. And by the way, that dog didn't show up until over an hour of my son's disappearance, so that's kind of a downer. Mm-hmm. They had the helicopter fly at least, almost 6 days straight, and then they did it a 7th and 8th time through the summer. They had training exercises where different SARs from all over Nova Scotia came together, and they did a big search for Dylan back in the summer.
I remember. Oh, sorry. I remember hearing about like a test that was done where they were putting like a dummy in the water to kind of test where the dummy would end up. Do you recall that?
I recall that it got them really no answers. It actually didn't make it out of the brook. They actually had to take the weights out, and it would actually fetch up in a certain part by the train bridge every time. they actually had to push it out of the brook into the river and then follow it. It didn't go as well as they had thought.
Yeah, so their plan would have been to put the dummy in the water to imitate Dylan and see where it ends up, but it wasn't even leaving that area.
Yeah, and that was the mouth to the river, right? They didn't put the dummy anywhere near where Dylan went missing, or at least his first boot was found, because there's no way that dummy would go through the debris. So,
interesting.
Once again, it really didn't turn up any evidence in my mind. But just more questions.
Of all the searching they've done, really the only thing that's been found, is it one boot or were both boots found?
Both boots were recovered. One was in the shopping cart, and one was just before the mouth of the river. It was just under the train tracks, emerged, it was underwater.
And is there any, like, these are absolutely his boots? Like, is there any question, or is that for sure his boots that were found?
They were 100% his boots. I actually have his boot right here. One of his boots. They're size 13. I know there was a bunch of, I guess, cyberbullying, but the grandmother made a lot of mistakes in the description of Dylan, which we're pretty upset about. Like she bought these boots for him. She had the color wrong. She said they were blue. She had a lot of, she said they were size 7 or 13. I remember back when people were asking me that, and I would agree, yes, they were size 7, but I was agreeing with the grandmother, because as a father, like me and you both, you don't pay attention to the size of your child's boots. The wife usually goes out and grabs them, so.
I couldn't tell you either of my kids' shoe size. You're exactly right.
Yeah, but why didn't she know? We don't know. Like, I don't know. So, but the description was wrong. It was pretty hard.
Yeah, and I followed very closely from the moment it was shared that Dylan was missing. This was a really sensitive time in Nova Scotia, because we of course had the Nova Scotia arson and shooting rampage. Only weeks later, as you said earlier, is when Dylan went missing.
They call it the shell shock of Nova Scotia, the disappearance of Dylan.
Yeah, and between those two events has led to, it seems like half the cars in this province have a Nova Scotia Strong sticker. And a part of that was just the tragedy after tragedy that Nova Scotia was being hit by. And with Dylan's disappearance, I was really watching it, and at first it was, a lot of the coverage was very hopeful, as if he was going to be found. But then only, I think it was about a weekend, the police announced it's switching from a search to a recovery mission. When that happened, did that have any specific significance to you? Like, do you recall that statement being made? And if so, can you talk about how you learned and how you felt when you heard that?
That day, you want to know exactly what happened. That day when I found out about that, we were in the command center that they had set up in the baseball field. So anyway, the chief and a bunch of these professionals were all in there. Me, Ashley, and I think my sister. And anyway, they were telling us how we're not going into a recovery, we're not there yet. Not to worry, we're not giving up. We still have hope. And it was no more than a few hours later we found that out on the news. Not from the professionals, but the news. So it hit us like a truck. The feeling, like, there's no way to describe the feelings, really. It breaks you in every possible way.
I can't even imagine. And at that point, like, for that first week, did you have a lot of hope that he was gonna be found, or was it pretty grim early on in your mind?
Well, after so long, right, you start to think, I'll be honest, you start to think, how long can a child live out in this chilly weather? Diapers not changed, it's raining, it's, so you're waiting for him to be found, and you see the rain going, and, it's, you think the worst, obviously, like, but at the same time, you have hope, so it's you're just in shock. You don't know if you're coming or going.
For a lot of people, I've mentioned this, but the focus has been on the brook, with the main story people talking about being that Dylan somehow found his way into the water and was swept away. Was there ever any reason to search elsewhere, or for the investigation to lead in any other way, or was that really the only theory that's been?
No, 100% that someone could have thrown the boots in the water. Who's to say that didn't happen? They say statistics of a 3-year-old boy going into a body of water is 3%. So that's pretty damn low. So who's to say somebody didn't just scoop him up, right place, right time, and toss his boots in, threw everybody off?
Mm-hmm.
It's possible, right? Just like that 3% chance that's on Search and Rescue Statistic Handbook, right? So that's real statistics on a child going into a body of water. So, it's very possible he could have been taken. Because there's no body, there's no Dylan, there's only boots in the water. So at this point, anything's possible.
And this, sadly, and this is something else that's going to horrify people who don't hear a lot of stories like this, but you've received ransom demands, or your family and some members of your family have received ransom demands. And I've heard that before more than once. Can you talk about getting that and where that led?
So yeah, we've had 7 or 8, maybe even 9 of them now. But yeah, some of them they're horrible. They're disgusting. You get these ones and it almost, their children beat up and they want, a certain amount of money, or we'll beat them up some more, or we'll kill them in a certain amount of time. We've had phone calls where, this tip was, your son's out and I can't say where on public, but somewhere close by here, I think that they have your son, the cops go, they actually raid the place and everything. They're looking beyond walls, barns, that's, I guess, not a ransom, but it was just a horrible tip. Get your blood going, hopes and dreams, and they just break. But we've had ransoms of $10,000. We've had ransoms of like $40,000. We've had ransoms as low as $2,000. One guy wanted $200 in a certain amount of time. Right? It's ridiculous. Why people do it? Who knows?
Well, certainly there's people who prey on the vulnerable, but to think that there's someone out there in the world who are looking for missing children as a way to target their parents for $200 or $4,000 is just, I guess it just shows you
don't realize what they're putting us through, because at first you think it's real. Wow, what is going on, right? Right down to the police station just to find out it's a fake account, and you can never find out if it's real or not. So.
And you mentioned the one tip or lead or whatever that gave you some hope and led to this big search that went nowhere. Has there been many tips or leads that gave you anything beyond just like sheer disappointment? Like, has there been information that came in any way? You don't have to give the information, but I'm just wondering, like, how often you're getting information.
At first, it was all the time. Every couple of weeks, we'd get a tip. We've went in, we've watched videos. The child looks like Dylan, acts like Dylan, got a mask on. Makes it tough, right? So, you're sitting after a few weeks wondering, is that him? That really looked like him? God, that's him. And then you get that phone call, that wasn't your son. And think of getting that over and over and over again. And still today. Just dealing with that alone is hard.
Mm-hmm. The idea of like tips coming through, this is, members of the public, in some cases your community members, and not surprisingly, a missing child will lead to a tremendous amount of community involvement. Like I've already mentioned the idea of these civilian searches. It seemed like as soon as word got out that Dylan was missing, people were rallying to try to help. Can you talk a bit about what your community has been able to do to support Dylan's family and you and Ashley?
The community was great. Right up until the Truro police shut it down, and for what reason we're not sure. They stopped all public searches.
Yeah, I remember that in the news because the public, like people were organizing online to get in a group and, walk down the brook or I remember seeing sheets where there was like grids and they were planning searches of these different areas. And then the Truro police asked them not to do that.
They told the public, they put it in the news and everything, not to search for Dylan or you probably get in trouble. I'm not sure what the consequences were, but but then you see in other provinces where the cops aren't stopping them from searching, you don't see that post. And that's like in Nova Scotia too, same province, right? There's a few different things going on. But like goes for one, goes for all. So, why were we shut down? And and then you see other authorities not shutting things down, which is great, which is the way it should have been. But why do we get shut down? I guess a lot of questions that I'll never get answers to. But
and is that still at this point? Like I don't recall hearing recently of planned searches, but I guess in the winter it must be hard to do things like that. Are the public still involved in searches in any way?
For the public, it's only we search every weekend, every Sunday. Doesn't matter if it's raining, snowing, windy. It doesn't matter. And I go out almost every day. Hard not to. Doesn't matter if there's snow or not. I fly my drone. I've got my license to fly. I use the software to do grids and all that search and rescue stuff with them. But for the public, it's slowed right down. Our groups never got as high as I think there was once it got as high as 40 people. But after that, it was mainly 7 people, 8 people every time. Mm-hmm. So for support for Truro, I wish it was a little better. I definitely wish it was.
No,
he's from the community. So.
Mm-hmm. Something I know this is sensitive and not something you can say a lot about, but community involvement in a case of a missing person, especially when that community is online in different groups and whatnot, there's almost always, there seems to be a dark side of it. And that is probably not more obvious in any other case, any case more than Dylan's. We don't need to get into it, but can you talk a bit about accusations waged towards you or Ashley early on in his disappearance?
Right from the beginning, because everybody's seen the TikTok videos and all this stuff, and that it had nothing to do with anything. But it was just straight to Ashley killed him, Ashley did that, Ashley done that. And
just sorry to interrupt you, but the TikTok videos you're talking about, Ashley had people were going through her old social media posts, finding videos and kind of flipping the context around to suggest maybe she was like, I recall there was one where she was like singing a song or something, and the lyrics to the song made it sound like it was talking about like harm to a child or something. Am I remembering that right?
It was actually from the Tiger King. It came out on Netflix around that time. We thought it was funny, so she was making just little funny things on TikTok, and a lot of people did it. The only reason they teared Ashley apart is because Dylan's disappearance a few days after, so they flocked over, and I don't know. There's no words to describe these people.
Mm-hmm. How do you recall like the first time where you're like, whoa, there's people online who are, trying to say that we had something to do with it? Do you remember like when that hit you, that was happening?
First week, give or take. It was crazy. It was crazy enough that most of the family was trying to keep us off it. And you wouldn't believe it. It was nasty. And it still happens today. It's slowing down a bit, but they still got these groups, and they still think we're not doing enough, or that I killed them, or they more or less they're pointing their fingers at me now. So I guess everybody's taking their turn. It was Ashley, and then it was Norm, the grandfather, and then I guess now it's my turn. I don't know.
That is awful, but it's I know we're not going to get into this, but this is before the courts at this point. Is that right?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
The parents of a toddler who disappeared last spring are taking their fight against cyberbullying to court. They allege they were targeted with online threats and false allegations about how their son disappeared. 10 months later, they say it's still going on.
Dylan Ehler disappeared in May. His parents say cyberbullying has hindered their search. They blame Facebook groups, now named in a civil action. The couple hopes the judge will order the groups to be shut down and award them damages under a new cyberbullying law brought in following the death of Rtea Parsons. Tom Hurley is one of the administrators for one of the groups.
I feel bad for them. I really do. But they also got to remember that we're not the only ones doing it. The only reason we're here today is because we didn't hide behind fake accounts like everybody else is doing.
Hurley's page has already been taken down, but the couple worries it won't be permanent.
Ultimately, they're able to open it and close it whenever they want at this point, and so we're looking for an order that they can't do that anymore.
Like I said, I'm sorry that the family is going through that. Our intentions were to try to help them find Dylan and figure out what we can do next and all that stuff there, and it was going good from the beginning. And then something turned somewhere.
The matter is scheduled to be back in court April 6th to set a date for a hearing. None of the allegations has been proven in court.
But for how it makes us feel, they're just breaking us a little more every day. You know, they're just making us look like worse people. You know, what I really want to get across is the impact they're putting on Dylan's searches. That is what they don't realize. So they're accusing us of this and that, and you know, making up stories and saying we're killers and God knows what else. But what they don't realize is the impact they're putting on Dylan, because he wants to come and help us search, right?
It's just muddying the water, so to speak. Which I guess that analogy suits even better here because you're searching.
You can also look at it this way: who wants to get involved with their drama? You know, I have family members like my brother. He's actually got turned away from some jobs because of my drama. You know, it's not only affecting me, but it's affecting my family. I've had my sister get thrown into it for no reason. My younger sister, someone made a post saying she's the bigger girl that kidnapped Dylan from New Brunswick. You know, so then they were attacking my sister, you know, and yeah, the public, they did a number, you know, they even had some of my family members believing in some of this shit, right? You know, because they fell into it. They didn't know what to believe. Everything was happening so fast, you know, so yeah, they did a number to us.
Yeah, people like the terminology people would often use is like an armchair detective or like a web sleuth, like a random civilian person who is on the internet in these groups who are working, you know, and it's a group of people working together trying to, like, quote unquote, solve a crime. Often they're not using the checks and balances that a real investigation or like law enforcement would use, and it can very quickly turn into, like, you know, a witch hunt. And it seems like in a lot of tragedies, such as what's happening with your family, that witch hunt seems, the bigger the case and the more public attention it gets, the more ravenous that witch hunt is. And I don't know if you watch this sort of thing, but on Netflix there was just a documentary called Cecil Hotel, and it was about this disappearance of a young woman named Alyssa Lamb who went missing in the U.S. somewhere. But anyway, what ended up happening was it became this huge case, and people online, web sleuth type people organizing in Facebook and wherever else, were picking out random suspects and basically ruining people's lives when these web communities would set their sights on a specific group. Now, we won't talk a lot about the legal case that's going on, but it certainly seems like your family's an example of a local case that this has happened or has happened to.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, really. Like, I don't understand it, really. Like, why not just come help? I don't see what you can solve on Facebook unless you actually get your hands dirty. What are you doing for anybody? Like,
well, let's talk Let's talk about how people can help. So if someone's out there, they know Dylan's story, or they're listening to us talk now and they want to, maybe they're in the area and they're not far from Truro and they want to help, how can people support you and Ashley and the rest of the people searching for Dylan? Ultimately, how can we support Dylan?
You guys can support Dylan by being there. If you're local, if you have just, a free hour of time, walk the waters, join our searches. You can join our Facebook page at Dylan Ehler Search Updates. Or you can go onto my profile, Jason Ehler, and share and, see the public events for searching.
Just want to make sure I just want to make sure they heard you. There's a Facebook group that you have where you're posting updates about the search. Is that the Dylan Ehler Search Updates Facebook group?
Dylan Ehler Search Updates. It's more than just that. You can follow. You can give your ideas. If you want to go through pictures of, like I have drone images on there. I put them through the Lock 8 Search and Rescue, but then I share them on the group so other people can go through in case we miss something. Images, DJI images. And anyway, it's a group for supporting Dylan, basically.
Mm-hmm. And I should also mention, this has been in the news a lot, but people locally may not have heard this. There is a pretty significant reward being offered. Can you talk about the reward, how that came to be, and who ultimately would be paying that if it's given out?
If it's given out, it's in a bank account. So if information is found, they go through the police and prove that it's Dylan or an article of Dylan's. You can have the money.
How much money are we talking about?
It's 18,000 something. I can't remember right off the top of my head. 18,700 or $18,007.
And where did that come from? Was that like a donation or something? Like, where did this reward come from?
So originally somebody set up a GoFundMe, and it was mainly for for while we're looking for Dylan, because we wouldn't be working, and it would help with the bills and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But instead of doing that, we put it into his reward, and then other people donated. We done fundraisers to add to it. Family members put money in towards it, and we just eventually raised that much.
That's good. Okay, well, people, I think in any public searches, like if you're planning like a meetup or something for people to go, search a certain area, that'll be happening. That'll be organized through the Facebook group.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Now, the only other thing I'll ask you, and this is a big ask because it's likely impossible, but just for someone. Fortunately, a lot of the people listening have never and will never experience anything like what you're going through. Even now, 10 months-ish since your then 3-year-old son had disappeared, how does this affect you? Like, how are you... I personally, just to give my experience, I couldn't imagine even being able to lift my head off of my pillow dealing with this. Like, how do you feel going through this?
It's really easy, really. It's the drive that you have for your child. So you think you would lay in bed and you would cry and your head be in a pillow, but you wouldn't be. You'd be driven to find them. So, it'd be different if my son got hit by a car. I'd know what happened. You would grieve and you would slowly, you would never get over it, but you know what I mean. But for this type of incident, you can't really grieve. It's every day, day one, every day. It's screwed up.
It's certainly
it wrecks you in every possible way. I don't even like people anymore after everything that's happened with the cyberbullying, with my son's disappearance, with the amount of support and everything else. It slowly breaks you. Every day that goes by, it just breaks you a little more.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never be the same person again.
And I should ask this as well, is like you had mentioned early on, at the time he went missing, you and Ashley were having a hard time, a difficult period. Now I guess you're forced to work together for Dylan's sake. Like, how is that relationship, if you're comfortable saying at this point, between you and Ashley?
It's turned right around. We're very supportive of one another. It's changed us, but at the same time, it's a struggle. Because there's a lot of tension. Our son's missing, so it's everything's a fight. Not in a fight in a bad way, but it's just everything's it never stops. You're just mentally exhausted.
And you had mentioned one last thing that I'm just be curious how you would explain this or how you would answer this, but you had signaled some doubt in the version of the story that Dylan walks off and gets into and ends up in the water. But at the same time, you're talking about searching the water. Do you have doubts that is where he ended up, or in your heart of hearts, do you feel like he ended up in the water?
You guys want to know how I feel about the whole thing, what goes through my head? What goes through my head with the whole thing is right from the grandmother, I believe that she neglected to watch him. And I believe that she turned her back for a lot longer than what she's saying, and I believe that he possibly did go into that brook. But to prove that, it's impossible. So one day you think, yeah, he probably drowned. Then the other day, well, no, he's alive. I could feel it, but you really just don't know. All I can say is I wish Dorothy had made better choices that day.
I want to thank you for joining Jason Ehler and I for this difficult discussion regarding the disappearance of his 3-year-old son, Dylan. Although we can only imagine how Jason and Ashley must feel, we can likely all agree that they'll feel a little bit better with some community support, and of course with an answer to their tragic mystery. If anyone listening has any means to help, be it by volunteering on a search team or offering up a monetary donation, I urge you to join the Search for Dylan Ehler Facebook group or contact me and I can connect you with Jason directly. The mystery of what happened to Dylan needs to be solved. 3-year-olds can't simply disappear. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I must say there were parts of this discussion with Jason that surprised me. Now, I went into this knowing that many parts of the story didn't make sense and seemed to defy logic and reason. But what really surprised me was the pointed criticism Jason directed towards Dylan's grandmother, Dorothy.
I believe that she neglected to watch him. And I believe that she turned her back for a lot longer than what she's saying, and I believe that he possibly did go into that brook. All I can say is I wish Dorothy had made better choices that day.
For the most part, Dorothy Parsons has remained a sort of mystery figure in this case. Most of what we know about her and her version of the events of that day come from second-hand sources, not from her directly. Well, in talking to Jason, it's clear to me that her version of the story is critical in understanding the events immediately leading to Dylan's disappearance. And in the next episode of Nighttime, we'll revisit this case and hear Dorothy's story directly from her.
People think I'm into dark arts, satanic rituals, that, he wasn't really here, that, his mother did something and I'm helping her cover it up. And there's just, I've gotten threats of people coming my way to beat the crap out of me, to leave me in a pool of my own blood to die. It's ridiculous.
And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of Nighttime, but before we part, I have to give some thanks. First, I want to thank Jason for sharing a father's worst nightmare with us. Next, a big shout out to Monty Data for contributing the music to this episode. And lastly, a massive thanks to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, please consider subscribing to the premium feed. Not only does it make the show possible, it'll give you a lot more than what you'll find here on the free feed, as I'm adding exclusive content regularly. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can go premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't help financially, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing the episodes on social media and letting like-minded friends know about what we're doing here. If you have any story ideas or if you want to give feedback on the show, find me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact or on social media. I use Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'm often live on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel. So until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.